If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Remarking on the passing of George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 41. I don't know if you saw this 1999 interview he gave with Larry King, so his son, W, of course, running for president at the time. And he was asked the dynasty question, the Bush dynasty question. The response was instructive.
Do you ever think, before we talk about the book, that your family, like the Adamses, Kennedys, and Roosevelts, have become an American political dynasty?
Well, we don't like the word dynasty.
What would
but
you call it?
I tell you what we do, that now that I'm out of politics, and literally, I mean, I don't go to Washington, I don't testify, I don't write op-ed pieces. I had my chance, it's my son's chance. And what Barbara and I do is just take pride. You show me a picture of your kid. I take the same pride in George and Jeb as I did when they could hit a triple in Little League. And they're governors of two big states.
But you don't think about your father and the whole family was in politics like the Ken. I mean, when you think about it, the Adams, Kennedys, Roosevelts, and Bushes are four American political families.
Well, we haven't got that far along that we think about it in that legacy or dynasty terms. It's hard to differentiate. It's more.
Do you ever think about being first father?
Yeah, I do, with enormous pride in our son that's trying, and you know, respect for anybody that gets into this tough arena these days. Those on the other side. I mean,
You miss it?
I don't. I honestly, Larry, I don't. I had my chance, and I don't miss it.
And he just had a life of public service. I mean, from being a congressman to a CIA director to World War II aviator, combat pilot. I mean, he did it all.
He did. It was a fascinating life, and his perspective on political dynasty, because what Larry King said in setting it up, boy, I mean, that just, of course, was further codified with Jeb's tenure as governor of Florida, and then W going from governor of Texas to two-term president. For more on the Bush 41 legacy and some other current geopolitical matters, we're pleased to be joined by our old friend Sebastian Gorka, former deputy assistant to President Trump, author of the book Why We Fight, Defending America's Enemies with No Apologies, and also a forthcoming host on these airwaves starting Jan 1. America First is the name of his program, and it'll be on our schedule at 10 p.m. in the evening. Sebastian Gorka, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good morning, guys.
Morning. So in the foreign policy arena, much has been said about Bush 41's administration of the end of the Cold War, as well as, obviously, the success of Gulf War I, although there's this nagging criticism in some quarters about his decision not to go on to Baghdad to take out Saddam. How do you assess his foreign policy prowess as a president?
I think the most important point with regards to his legacy internationally is this is a man who, one of the few presidents, I think he and Trump have a similarity in that they inherited a world in which everything was changing geopolitically, geostrategically. In the case of Bush 41, it was the end of the Cold War, and the way that he managed that transition in a way that did not lead to a kinetic conflict is to be deemed remarkable. This is a man who served his nation for practically half a century, from being the youngest naval aviator to being president. That's quite stunning. The sad thing with regards to his legacy today is how a man who was lambasted, constantly lambasted by the left, by the so-called mainstream media, is now being praised by the same people who criticized him purely as a way to bash and get at the current Republican incumbent in the White House. So a great man, a patriot, a true servant to this nation, but a man whose legacy is being used for partisan political purposes. It's quite saddening.
Well, why do you think America didn't embrace him for a second term?
I'm not going to speak for all Americans. I think there were some expectations. There was that infamous moment, read my lips, no new taxes. Why did, for example, after World War II, the British not embrace Winston Churchill? Winston Churchill, who saved Western civilization almost single-handedly, was voted out of office right after World War II. Populations, voters can be fickle people, and that's the right you have in a democracy.
Wanted to get your take on the Yellow Jackets in Paris. 280,000 people from across France pushing back against gas tax increase, in particular, 30-cent tax increase imposed by Macron and his fellows to wean France off fossil fuels, not being received particularly well out on the hustings. And I wonder if what we see from the Yellow Jackets, the Miserables, if you will, is comparable to the revolt by the deplorables in this country.
Big difference. Deplorables don't set the streets on fire. That's Antifa. That's the left-wing demonstrators that cause damage and destruction in their wake. Macron is in trouble. His popularity is beneath 30% now. He sold himself as an outsider. He sold himself as a kind of Donald Trump, a person who's not part of the political establishment. But unlike Donald Trump, he has shown himself to be a hostage to globalizing forces and to the established lobby groups, special interest groups. And that's why you see the working class. That's why you see the French people say, you're not representing France. In my book, Why We Fight, there's a photograph of one of my proudest days in the White House when the president stood in the Rose Garden, pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords. And then there's that famous sentence he spoke. He said, I was elected by the citizens of Pittsburgh to be the president of America, not the citizens of Paris. That's what America First means, when a head of state like Donald Trump represents American interests, American workers. Macron said he was going to do the same, and he's not. He's kowtowing to the interests of the unrepresentative, unelected officials in the EU, and the French people are sending him a message that maybe he should be a little bit more nationalist, just like Donald Trump.
Right, certainly after he gave Trump the lecture about nationalism.
Right.
But I just want to stick on this. Setting aside the violence, and I, of course, agree with you about that.
And on that point, just one point.
Okay.
The goal of Macron to lecture us with the president sitting in the front row of the dangers of nationalism. President Macron, if it weren't for American nationalism, you would be speaking German today.
But on this revolt, setting aside the violence, do you see some strains of hope for Western Europe by seeing people from the countryside going to the big city to tell the big city socialists something about their interest in their own livelihoods and not sort of the religion of environmentalist extremism or globalism?
I do potentially. I have no idea of predicting where it's going to go in France or Europe more broadly. I think Brexit showed you the level, the depth of dissatisfaction with the elite politics of the European Union. If you look at the midterms here in America, there's clearly a split between the urban areas and the rural areas. And yet again, this is exactly why Donald Trump won. His platform was about the forgotten men and women who have not been served well by either side, whether it's Democrat or GOP, who simply seem to serve their own interests. So, yeah, look, if you look at the recent results, the political, if you look at the elections in Hungary, in Austria, in Italy, the Brexit itself, there is a tide of resentment. What it will result in, nobody knows.
No, I saw you on television, I think it was last night, where you were ripping a neighborhood in Washington, D.C. who actually want to name a street after Khashoggi.
Yeah.
What is that? Why in the world would they want to do that?
Yeah, incredible. Truly incredible. Yeah, a district in Washington, I think that includes the Saudi embassy, wants to rename the street after the man who was killed allegedly by the Saudis. Look, this guy was murdered. It was wrong. But the idea that you name a street in D.C. after Khashoggi, this is a man who was a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's out there. You can find the details. Who was very, very close to Osama bin Laden, and who in his last article, his last op-ed piece before he was murdered, wrote of the values, the virtues of theocracy, and how we need to have more theocracy and less democracy in the Middle East. It would be akin to naming a street after Ayman al-Zawahiri, the current head of Al-Qaeda. It would be like naming a street after Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11. We don't do that in America. We have separation of church and state, and those people who don't believe in representative democracy aren't honored by having streets named after them. So, look, there's a reason D.C. voted more than 95% for Hillary Clinton. It really is a very different part of America.
Right. So what did Cal Thomas once say? Something like 42 square miles surrounded by reality, something like that. I wanted to get your reaction to this study Center for Immigration Studies put out, analyzing numbers from 2014. They find 63% of non-citizens using a welfare program grows to 70% for those who have been in America for 10 years or more. And how does that inform, in your opinion, what the president should do with respect to going to the mat, even for the quote-unquote government shutdown over border wall funding?
Yeah, it's stunning. He tweeted out yesterday that billions of dollars would be saved if we sealed the border, and he's absolutely right. If you look at those figures, you've got millions of people who are suckling at the teat of the government subsidies that are provided for by who? You and me. We pay for illegal aliens to get welfare in America. Think of the lives that are being ruined right now by the influx of fentanyl and other drugs across the southern border. Think of the money that would be saved, the lives that would be saved if we built the wall and we had E-Verify. With regards to what the president is doing in the shutdown, look, Chuck Schumer lost last time. The narrative was not on the side of the Democrats. Because Americans saw that one party, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi's party, was on the side of illegals and on the side of criminals in sanctuary cities, whilst the Republicans were on the side of U.S. citizens and the military. When you're prepared to shut down the government, take money away from our armed forces in the name of protecting illegals, that doesn't look very good. So I think the president once again is going to call Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi's bluff, and we'll see who blinks first.
He is Sebastian Gorka, former deputy assistant to President Trump, author of the book Why We Fight, Defeating America's Enemies with No Apologies. And in just a month, beginning of the year, catch him, his America First program on Salem in Chicago. He'll be on at 10 p.m. Sebastian Gorka, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. God bless. Have a great one.
You too.
Yep. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.